envy, drinking bouts, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. And of course, he continues in contrast the fruits of the Spirit and speaks about self-control, sobriety, and these are the virtues that oppose the vices of, say, drunkenness, insobriety, or of gluttony. St. Paul's teaching on the sin of gluttony, he includes most of the capital sins or manifestations of them when he speaks about the fruits of the Spirit and the fruits of the flesh. But St. Paul highlights here a particular occasion of gluttony, that of a gluttony in drink. Many of these capital sins don't have to deal just strictly with the object of the activity. For example, eating and drinking are good acts. We need to eat, we need to drink to stay alive. And God has given a certain pleasure associated with these human activities that are essential to the preservation of life or the continuation of the race. We spoke about that when we treated lust. Lust is a disordered desire for sexual pleasure out of the context, or lusting, using another person's for one's own self-gratification. And the same thing is true with gluttony. It's a glutton, a person who has the vice of gluttony, would actually be living to eat or to drink rather than eating or drinking to live. This is making the means an end rather than subordinating the means toward the end, namely life and the preservation of life. So of itself, eating and drinking are good activities. We have to ask the question, for example, the world says that things are good because they're pleasurable. And we, as Christians, say no, that because it's good, it's pleasurable. And so we want to pursue the good, and of course life, the preservation of human nature. But because of our wound of original sin, and then repetitive sins, and sometimes the culture in which we're raised, we end up creating these habits of too much or immoderation in drink and eating. And of course, then fall into the sin, the vice of gluttony. Gluttony it comes from the word glutire. Glutire actually means to gulp down. It's kind of like big gulping. It's taking either too much or taking in the wrong context or too hastily, but not using the means in direct to the end. The legitimate pleasure that we have in eating or drinking is a certain good thing. And of course, we can't really eat or drink without taking pleasure in these activities. And that's a good of itself. However, we have to moderate our intake and moderate how we particularly go about satisfying our need for food and drink. There's a number of effects, negative effects of gluttony. Of course, it can actually get us to hell. We can sin mortally by sinning in gluttony, by eating to the point of excess or drinking into drunkenness. We just heard about too much drink, becoming intoxicated, and sinning mortally when we're not in our right state of consciousness, or when we put ourselves in danger to other sins, or actually put others' lives in danger because of our own lack of self-possession, which inebriation brings. St. Thomas tells us of a number of different manifestations of gluttony. He kind of broadens the idea. In the old days, gluttony was seen as wastefulness, and so it was a sin because it wasted good food which needed to be available to all the people of the world. And so by taking too much or to have to throw away was a wastefulness, and thus I was depriving someone who was going without. And so it would be a sin of, against justice, but also was seen as a sin of gluttony. Also, with regard to having enough, but then taking too much, was seen as a lack of temperance. In other words, not being able to control myself and how much I took. St. Thomas says that eating too soon is a manifestation of gluttony. Not waiting to the proper time to eat, whether it be the breakfast hour, the noon hour, or the evening hour. Eating too expensively, that I had to have certain quality of food, and the amount of money that I spent on food could be a sin against gluttony. Eating too much. How much of my portions, what I need to eat and what I need, and taking that second piece of pie, that second serving when I don't need it. Eating too eagerly. Being preoccupied with food during the day can be an indication of this gluttony, or eating too quickly. Just gulping it down, you see, without savoring it and properly digesting. Eating too daintily. I have to be concerned about how it's cooked and it's seasoned and the temperature. This daintiness is kind of an attachment of pleasure that we have with regard to food. That's too much. And then, you see, eating wildly, eating between meals, and eating too much or in a disordered fashion. Remedies. What do? We need to fast. The church has normal fast days that we observe during Lent, certain times of fast, but Friday is a day that we generally abstain from meat or replace with some other sacrifice, but very helpful to put a sacrifice with regard to no desserts, no sweets, abstaining from a certain kind of food, maybe not heating up our food as we would otherwise. Abstinence, avoiding certain foods on certain days. Eating at certain times, being rigorous with ourselves in regard to when we eat and not eating between meals, for example. Saying our blessing before and after meals is already a rectifying of our intention, and sharing food with those who go without. All these are remedies for gluttony. Next time, let us move and treat the sin of sloth.
Coming up next, in a conversation with Bishop Michael Jarrell, Monsignor Richard Green interviews Bishop Jarrell about the recent USCCB meeting.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for another conversation today with Bishop Jarrell. Bishop, good to be with you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you and with all in our audience as well.
Bishop, in June, you attended the semi-annual meeting of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So what was on the agenda this time?
Well, it was a three-day meeting, and of course, there are many items on the agenda. But I thought that for the purpose of this program this morning, we can discuss a report that we heard from our National Review Board.
And what is the National Review Board?
The National Review Board was set up by the Conference of Bishops. It consists mostly of lay people, prominent lay people. And this review board was set up in the wake of the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People. It has to do with the so-called sex abuse crisis in the church, and many of us can remember in 2002 that this was a very big issue and came to the forefront at that time. And part of the bishop's response was to create this board to give some guidance and direction to the bishops in addressing this problem. So at this meeting I held in June, we did receive a report of the last 10 years. And the report was given by the chairman of the National Review Board, Mr. Al Knotson.
Okay, and what are some of the highlights of this report?
Well, actually, the report had many different items in it. We can only select a few, but I think what stood out to me was the constant refrain in that report that there has been a striking improvement in the church's response to this phenomenon. And in fact, I'll quote from the report, he says that children are safer now. So I found that very encouraging. I think it's also factual. I don't think the church always gets credit for this, but this relatively independent board does confirm the fact that there have been great improvements, and I think it's my duty to say so and to inform people of this.
Well, Bishop, what has made children safer?
I think there are a number of responses that the bishops have made throughout the United States. So again, I'll mention just a couple of them. First of all is the commitment to remove offenders from ministry, priests or deacons who have one incident of a sexual offense against a minor are indeed removed from ministry. Now that has been a great commitment, and our follow-through on it hasn't been perfect, but this is a commitment that the bishops have made. And I think that that certainly has made a difference. We can talk about all the reasons. I think many years ago, people in general did not understand how serious this problem was and how often persons with this particular problem would be inclined to repeat their offenses, and how that put children at danger. So there's been a great stride there in removing from ministry those who are guilty of even one infraction against minors. The second thing, I think, is the safe environment programs. In other words, what do we do with regard to prevention? Background checks, for example, criminal background checks for persons in ministry or working with youth in any way, in our parishes, in our schools, anywhere under church auspices. Also training for clergy, for employees, and for all volunteers who work with minors. This has been an extensive program. It is going on in all of our church parishes. Each parish has a coordinator for this purpose. And here we're extending this beyond just the clergy, but all of our employees who work with children, all of our volunteers who work with children have to undergo this training so they know what to look for in fellow employees, they know what to look for in the children, and they're made conscious of their duty to report these things. So that's been very important. And the third thing is the education of young people and the parents. We offer this for parents as well. So these programs, I think, are helping to make children safer.
Okay. So Bishop, what else is in the report?
Well, I will make one quotation. Despite solid evidence to the contrary, as tracked by our annual reports, many of the faithful believe that sexual abuse by clergy is occurring at high levels and is still being covered up. We get news reports of things that happened years ago, but people don't always read that closely or listen that closely to understand that it was in the past. And Mr. Knotson's report was to make it clear that there has been great improvement, and we do not get reports of those same high levels in recent years. So I think that that's important that we repeat.
Okay. Bishop, any final thoughts that you'd have on this topic?
Well, as Bishop of the Diocese of Lafayette, I want to assure everyone of my own personal commitment to the Charter for the protection of children and young people, and my commitment to all of the particulars with regard to our Safe Environment program. We do have a diocesan coordinator, and as I mentioned, every parish and every school has a coordinator. But I do ask people's cooperation as well. Sometimes when we tell volunteers they need to undergo training, they're offended. They say, we're not the problem. No, but you can be part of the solution. And we ask everybody's cooperation.
Well, thank you very much, Bishop. And we'll see you next week with another conversation with Bishop Michael Jarrell of the Diocese of Lafayette. And the report the Bishop referred to is on the USCCB website, www.usccb.org.
Thank you, Bishop Jarrell and Monsignor Green. We hope you've enjoyed our program because it is produced for you. So please join us next week on this station as we tell the people about the Diocese of Lafayette and the good news of our Catholic faith.